ये अपना संजीवन है।
Hi friends, we are learning a poem, a photograph by Shirley Towson. So far, we have understood initial three stanzas, and now let's tune in the second part with the last stanza of the poem and summary and other elements, aspects related to the poem. Now let's begin with the last stanza of the poem. Allow me to read aloud the last stanza of the poem. Now she has been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived, and of these circumstances there is nothing to say at all. It's a silence, silence. In the above lines of the last stanza, the poet says that her mother died 12 years ago, the same age her mother was in the photograph. Whenever poet thinks of her mother's death, she cannot explain what effect she has of her mother's death. Death has silenced her mother, which has also left her speechless. Now, mother is no more. She was passed away some years ago, and poetess remembered her, and then she didn't know what were the circumstances, what was the situation, but she was no more. And 12 years passed, the same age that she was reflected in the photograph when it was clicked at the seashore. Death has silenced her mother, which has also left her speechless. So there's nothing to say at all. Poetess is okay referring here. There's nothing to say at all. She accepted the truth. She accepted the death of her mother, and so silence prevailed after her mother's death, and it was only the silence which was there after the death of mother. And now she has been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived. These lines indicate that the years were same. What the age in the photograph which was clicked in those years, in those days, the same years had passed after her death. And of these circumstances, there is nothing to say at all. And here poetess is speechless. He has nothing to tell, he has nothing to say at all, and there's only silence prevailed everywhere. It's a silence silences. So death has silenced her mother, which has also left her speechless. So poet is also speechless because he's feeling silence after the death of her mother. Poetess lost her mother some years ago, and after the death of her mother, there was a complete absence of sound. There was the atmosphere was a speechless, and everywhere there was a complete absence of a sound. So silence was prevailed everywhere. Dear friends, now let's understand summary of the poem. In the introductory lines, the poet looks at the photograph of her mother, which was taken when her mother was 12 years old. She had gone for a sea holiday with her cousins Betty and Dolly, and while they were paddling, her uncle took a photograph of them. Each of the cousins was holding the hands of the poet's mother, who was the eldest among them. All the three of them stood smiling through their hair while the photo was taken. Her mother had a sweet face. All this happened before she was born. The waves washed their feet as it stood still. The powerful element of nature. It was standing as it is, no change with the sea or ocean. Years have fled past since then. Her mother grew up into an adult. Mother grew up. So she was okay moving forward in the sense of years. Her age was growing. They all underwent changes while the sea stood still. All the people, they all underwent so many changes in their life. The years lapse away, and they were moving ahead in the sense of years and in the sense of life. But on the other hand, the sea, the ocean stood still as it is when it was so many years ago, how it was in the same way it was standing without any changes. But on the other side, the human life which underwent a lot of changes in course of time. After about 20 or 30 years, the poet's mother would look at the photograph, laughing nostalgically and remembering the past. She would appreciate the dress worn by her cousins, Betty and Dolly. The sea holiday belonged to the past of her mother, and the poet still remembers how her mother would laugh looking at the snapshot which was taken some years ago when the poetess mother was just of 12 years old, and she had gone to a sea holiday with her girl cousins, and with them her uncle was there, and who had taken those photographs, those snapshots. In their life, years rolled away, lot of gap passed, and in course of time, but now as destined by fate, the mother has been dead for the past few years. Out of all these circumstances, there is nothing else left to say. The matter is closed, and the silence has sealed its fate. So, the episode of the life of poetess mother was ended, and she had met her end. She was passed away some 12 years ago. Out of all those circumstances, now there's nothing else left to say. The poetess was speechless. There was nothing to share to others. The matter is closed, and silence is a sealed its a face. So silence has sealed its a fate. The poem is a tribute to the poet's mother. She is looking at an old photograph of her mother, which has a frame of a cardboard. The picture has three girls, in which the middle one is the oldest and tallest. It is her mother when she was 12 years old or so. Beside her, on both sides, are her two cousins, Betty and Dolly, who are holding her hands, are younger than her. They went for paddling on a beach holiday. Her uncle took the photograph then. The poet could not help but notice her mother's sweet face. The sea touched her terribly transited feet, depicted that which depicted that she changed over the years, and the sea remained the same. After 20-30 years, her mother would laugh at the photograph. She would make the poet look at the photograph and tell her how their parents would dress them up for the beach holiday. The beach holiday was her mother's favorite past memories, while her laugh was the poet's favorite memory. Both of them lost something which they cherished and which they cherished a lot, and yet cannot live that moment again. Those sweet memories were now the poet's mother had been dead for the past 12 years, which is the same number as of her age when the photograph was taken back then. She cannot express the grief that she has from her mother's absence. Now let's understand some of the main ideas which are expressed in this poem. The first idea: death can numb you, leave you at a loss of words. So, death is a vital reality which no one can avoid. This universal truth. The finality of death and the loss cannot be expressed in words. and death can silence you and leave you speechless. It's a silence silences. So these words note that death cannot be expressed in words, and death can silence you and leave you speechless. The second point, the mother missed her past and found it amusing, and the daughter missed her past with her mother. That's the time she spent with her mother when she was alive. The third point, the words transient feat has a special significance. They show how transient, temporary human life is as compared to nature. Nature is the almighty, the powerful, the very strong element, and on the other hand, human life is a very temporary and transient. So here we can find a lot of contrast in this way. The poet realizes that she has lost her mother, and so that the labored ease of a loss sets in. Labored ease of a loss because it is difficult for her to forget her mother and put behind her past and move on. So it was a labored ease of a loss. It was very difficult for her to forget her mother. So it was like a burden. It was a great loss. It has a ease because the pain of a loss is reduced with the time. The pain of a loss is reduced in course of a time. So time acts as a healer, and the daughter moves on. Time actually act as a healer, and daughter moves on. So even though she hasn't really forgotten her mother, but then she is not even as great a pain now, 12 years after her mother's death, as she was when her mother died. Now let's understand little some more points with the help of the summary. The poet recalls the memory of her late mother gazing at the frame where the photograph of her mom along with cousin Betty and Dolly in their pre-teens. The photo refers to one of their visits to the sea beach. At the time, the mother's face had a sweetness of a young girl. Transient feet refers to the transience of a life. She recalls how mom had looked at the photo 20, 30 years later and laughed at the attires that she and her cousins were wearing. The sea holiday was a thing of a past for her. Her smiling face had become a thing of the past for the poet, just as the mother's childhood had been for her. Both of them, mom and poet, now move on despite the losses. Now she has been dead for about 12 years. The void in the life of the poet is silence and gloom that she feels. Moving forward, now let's understand some of the poetic devices used by the poet in this poem. So let's understand. The poem, a photograph, contains oxymoron. Labored ease, which is the contest of a loss, may mean avoiding the public display of a grief. Circumstance of the poem originate in an old photograph, recaps an old family holiday by the beach, evokes pleasant memories, a link to the past speaker as well as listener. The various things are raised in this poem are reminiscence, a young happy mother, fond memories, nostalgia, mother missed her carefree past, daughter misses her mother who is no more. Crystallizes thoughts, immortality, art, photograph, nature, sea, mortality, life's events and life, power of memory, difficulty of forgetting her mother, moving on from her past, silence, time, the great healer, death. So these are the crystallized thoughts which are referred, which are which can be found throughout the poem. The poetic technique turns a commonplace event into a source for a metaphysical discussion on life, a mix of joy and sorrows, memories. Holiday was her past, mine is for her laughter, death silences everyone, time, a great leveler and a healer. The language of the poem. It's a simple, unassuming, perhaps deliberately to highlight an universal theme. The simplicity of language contrast with the enormity of the thought expressed. Thank you for watching this video.